So before we jump into the topic today, which is primate cognition and communication, let's review some of the differences and some of the traits that we talked about in the last lecture in case you felt a bit over inundated with information. So you have two primary categorizations of your primates. You have your prosimians and your anthropoids, or if we're using the more recent or more modern taxonomy, it is the strepsirrhines versus the haplorhines, right? Strepsirrhines being prosimians and haplorhines being anthropoid primates. So to look at some of the differences between these two groups, in your prosimians, you have a larger olfactory bulb because they are more reliant on smell. In anthropoids or your haplorhines, you have a small olfactory bulb. Again, and with prosimians, you have an orbit with a post-orbital bar closure, so the back of the eye socket is actually open. The traits within prosimians that we're going to see are far more primitive, which makes sense because they evolved first. They have limited color vision as well as long snouts. We call this full prognathism. And prognathism is just a fancy word for how far your face sticks away from the rest of your skull. They have a dental formula pattern of 2-1-3-3, 2 incisors, 1 canine, 3 premolars, and 3 molars, and they evolved at or around 55 million years ago. Your anthropoid primates, your haplorhines, on the other hand, a smaller olfactory bulb, not as much reliance on smell, more reliance on sight, and you can see that with the development of a fully enclosed orbit where there's bone surrounding the entirety of the eye except in the front. Most of the traits you're going to find in your haplorhines are going to be derived because they evolved later. They have trichromatic color vision as well as relatively flat faces. So in essence, there's only mild to no facial prognathism. They either have a 2-1-2-3 formula if you're looking at old world monkeys and apes, which is 2 incisors, 1 canine, 2 premolars, and 3 molars. Or if you're looking at New World monkeys, you have 2 incisors, 1 canine, 3 premolars, and 3 molars, right? And this makes sense because New World monkeys were essentially the first to evolve after your prosimians. So in essence, these are going to be the ones that have a dental formula that is much more similar. And in general sense, your haplorhine primates evolved anywhere between 35 to 45 million years ago. If we review some of the types of movement, right, we have brachiation, knuckle walking, quadrimanual locomotion, bipedal locomotion, you have vertical clinging and leaping, as well as quadrupedal. The specific adaptations that go along with this, for brachiation, we see very long arm bones as well as finger bones. For knuckle walking, we see a bony ridge on the first phalange of each finger, showing that they're putting all their weight on their knuckles. For quadrimanual, we see fully opposable hands and feet. For bipedalism, we see a stiff foot arch and a non-opposable big toe. And we'll talk about this much more in later lectures. For vertical clinging and leaping, we have claws for climbing and enhanced leg muscles for leaping. For quadrupedal, we don't have any real specific adaptations. And examples of these, of course, brachiators, you have spider monkeys. For knuckle walkers, you have chimps and gorillas. For quadrimanual, you have orangutans. For bipedal, of course, you have humans. We are the only bipedal ape or only bipedal primate. For vertical clinging and leaping, you have lemurs. And of course, for quadrupedal, you have any given mammal, right? Your average dog or cat is considered a quadruped. So looking at some of the differences going further into these groups, we have New World monkeys versus Old World monkeys, or if we're using the taxonomic classification, we have platyrrhines, which are New World monkeys, and catarrhines, which are Old World monkeys. Your platyrrhines have relatively flat noses, are smaller in body size, have no diastema in the bottom tooth row, no ischial callosities or butt pads, and an example, of course, would be the squirrel monkey that is trying to ride on this parrot here. For your catarrhines, on the other hand, your Old World monkeys, they have hook noses or hook-shaped noses. They have a larger body size. There is a diastema in the lower tooth row, as well as they have ischial callosities, which are those butt pads. And an example of that would be your baboons, like the one featured here, who's making a very nasty gesture. So this is showing you that difference between hook noses versus kind of those flat noses. So just kind of know the difference between when you see a Platyrrhine, you're looking at nostrils that are kind of wide and open, whereas when you're looking at Catarrhines, you're kind of hook noses. They're kind of nostrils, but they're slits rather than kind of open holes. So reviewing teeth real quick, your apes, of course, have a Y5 cusp pattern and have low rounded molar crowns. Your monkeys, on the other hand, have 2 to 4 cusps. Most of them are bilophodonts, meaning they have that crest on the top of the tooth that goes across the entire tooth. You have 2 cusps on each molar crown, and some of them can be sharp. Lemurs, on the other hand, have 4 cusps on their teeth. They have a procumbent incisor as well as a tooth comb, and the tooth comb is always a dead giveaway. If you're looking at a skull and they have a tooth comb in the front, you are going to be looking at a prosimian, most likely a lemur. The corresponding diets for these, for apes, most are frugivores or omnivores. For your monkeys, they're either frugivores or folivores. And for your lemurs, you're either insectivores or folivores. This is showing you that Y5 pattern that is common for humans and apes. You don't really need to know too much about the directional stuff. You'll learn about that in the lab. That's what buccal, distal, lingual, and mesial stands for. But what we mean by Y5 is that you can draw a Y shape across the tooth, and it'll differentiate between the different cusps. And you usually have 4 to 5 just different cusps on the tooth. This is showing you bilophodont. This is the bilophodont cheek teeth of a baboon. You don't need to worry about metacone, hypocone, protocone, or paracone. This is just simply showing you just kind of that bilophodont tooth, and you can see the ridges that go down the middle of each cusp. This is again showing you a tooth comb. I know we looked at one of these in the last lecture, but just kind of to review with you. And that sharp tooth down kind of off to the left and off to the right there, that is what is the procumbent first incisor. So don't get tricked by that, because a lot of people assume that that's the canine tooth because it's sharp and it's bigger. That's not the canine tooth in lemurs, right? That is the first premolar. So reviewing some taxonomy, of course, we have the order primates. The suborder would be Strepsirrhines or Haplorhines. And then, of course, you have infraorder like Lemuriformes, and then we can break that down into superfamilies like the Lemuroideae or the Lorissoideae. Looking at Haplorhine taxonomy, of course, it's primate. The suborder would be Haplorhini. The infraorder would be Tarsiformes, which covers Tarsiers, or Anthropoideae. And your Anthropoideae are broken down into 2 groups, your Platyrrhines and your Catarrhines. And then we talked about each of the families within each. You have the Pithecidae, the Cebidae, and the Atilidae, and the New World monkeys. And in the Catarrhines, your Old World monkeys, you have the Cercopithecoideae, the Hominoideae, and in the Cercopithecoideae, you have the Colobinae as well as the Cercopithecinae. Do not worry, I am not going to tax you on taxonomy to this level. I will expect you to know the difference between a Platyrrhine and a Catarrhine, and the difference between a Strepsirrhine and a Haplorhine, but any further than that, I'm not going to expect you to memorize. So let's get to the topic for today, which is sex communication and cognition within various primate species. And we're going to talk a lot about apes because they are the most intelligent and do have the most complicated communication systems. First and foremost is tactile communication, which is very important in primates, and tactile means touching. It gives them a feeling of well-being, reassurance, and also helps with reconciliation after fights. For example, in baboons and murokhis, the males will hold each other's testicles if they are coalition partners or if they are trying to reconcile after having a fight with somebody. Touching is also used to indicate which copulatory position is desired in bonobos as well as chimpanzees. Visual communication is also very important. It occurs when one animal gains information from another just by looking at it, and it not only includes facial signals, but how an individual spaces itself and its body postures in kind of in the environment. So body language is important in primate groups. Why? Well, because we are visual creatures, so that body language conveys a certain degree of message and meaning to us, whether we, consciously recognize it or not. You can see that this male is kind of stood up on both hind legs. He's kind of got his shoulders kind of hunched over a little bit, and he is patrolling his area. He's kind of making himself look bigger so that all those kind of gaudy humans that are looking at him in the background know that this is his territory. There is a difference in expression that we see between anthropoids versus strepsirrhines or prosimians. Haplorhines have a better innervation to their facial muscles and have better expression, or the ability to have better expression of emotion than prosimians do. Prosimians, on the other hand, have that tethered lip, that frenulum in their snout, and often have a very long snout, which means that their faces are less expressive. So you can kind of see, here's that deadpan kind of look that a prosimian will give you versus a slightly more emotional, you kind of get a little bit of emotion in the look that this chimpanzee is giving you. So there's special importance of the mouth and regions around the mouth for interpreting visual signals in old world monkeys as well as apes. When you get a chance, kind of zoom in on this graphic, and it shows you all the different mouth positions that a chimpanzee will have that convey specific meanings, right? You have a grimace of fear, you have a laughing, you have a kind of pursing of the lips, and all of these kind of different mouth signals indicate different emotions as well as different messages to their other ape friends and family members. So there's a difference between bonobos and chimpanzees in terms of copulation. Bonobos will stare into each other's eyes for a long period prior to copulation to indicate mutual readiness. They will also look at each other during sex. With chimpanzees, there's not as much eye contact, and copulation may not always be a smooth process. Chimpanzees do tend to have a lot of rape in their kind of reproductive process. So let's take a look at visual displays and dominance. Non-human primates regularly maintain and manipulate social relations through the judicious use of visual communication, right? Threats can be used to coerce another individual into performing a particular activity, and male baboons use threats and neck bites to encourage females to follow them more closely so that other males don't steal them away. A dominant female chimp can actually use threat to have other females suckle their young, right? So in essence, even in marmoset groups, when you have a dominant female, that dominant female marmoset can come over and essentially take the baby away from another female and give that baby, basically shove it to the side and give that female her own baby and force that female to suckle her baby instead of their own child. So it just goes to show you how visual displays and how dominance hierarchies are extraordinarily important in different primate species. So attempts to gain support and cooperation of another may also involve gestures of reassurance and reconciliation, such as friendly approaches, right? So how those chimpanzees in particular use their body language will indicate to another chimpanzee whether they are a friend or a foe, right? So how to get an ally to help you when another animal is antagonizing you is exceptionally important, regardless of what primate species you belong to, right? It's kind of the same with humans, right? If you're getting attacked, having friends that are there to help you is always advantageous, right? It can prevent you from becoming seriously harmed. Primates are also very good at lying. There's a famous primatologist named DeWall, and he studied a group of chimps and noticed that those chimps are trying to hide their facial expressions so rival animals will not infer their emotional state, particularly when they show this facial expression of fear. So what they'll do is they'll take their hands and push their lips together to kind of hide that fear grimace. We also have instances where during mating season, lower-ranking males making approaches to females that are in estrus or females that are in heat, and turning his back and hiding his erection when the alpha male appears, right? Because the alpha is the only one who's supposed to be allowed to mate with females while they are in heat. So that lower-ranking male kind of realizes that and realizes that he could get in trouble with the alpha male, so he hides his erection from him. So animals for which scent is very important, like lemurs, callitrichid monkeys, and deer, have something called a Jacobson organ. This is actually a very ancient accessory organ that's part of the olfactory system of vertebrates, and it is very well developed in reptiles. So this shows you a Jacobson's organ in a reptile, and you can kind of see it if you look at the front of the olfactory lobe in the cat. And what this organ does is it actually acts as kind of like an empty sac with a bunch of smell receptors inside of it. So what the animal is capable of doing, whether it's a snake or a cat, is they're able to inflate and deflate this organ and kind of sample the surrounding air. And we see these Jacobson organs in creatures that have more heavy reliance on olfactory cues rather than visual cues. So mammals that have a Jacobson's organ can empty or inflate them, and this allows olfactory sampling of particular substances, right? And it probably functions to recognize species-specific odors, such as those present in the urine of females, right? Because a lot of mammalian species, and during mating time, females will have certain hormones in their urine, and that's what actually tracks males. Particularly if we have an example or a local example, that's how it works in deer. So olfactory communication, one method that we see in primates is urine washing, is a form of olfactory signaling. It's very stereotypical behavior in the primates that practice it, like capuchins, night monkeys, and squirrel monkeys. And each of these species has their own distinct movements for urine washing. And what they're doing is they're washing their urine. And what that does is it kind of, one, indicates readiness for mating, and also kind of creates group solidarity because you all kind of recognize each other's smells. So capuchins have a very interesting way in which they urine wash. They kind of urine on their hands and then rub it all over themselves and kind of do a little dance while they're doing it. So the functions of olfactory communication is used in many primate species during sexual interactions, right? And what this indicates is something called sexual receptivity, right? Non-human primate females indicate readiness to mate through a variety of olfactory, morphological, and visual signals. Males in primate species will often smell the perineal region right above the kind of sexual organs of the female and kind of see if she is kind of ready for mating, right? And scent will be also used to mark territories. So smell helps with ovulatory crypsis. It helps with species in which there are no outward visual signs that a woman is ovulating, right? Callitrichids are a species that has ovulatory crypsis, as well as humans, right? Human males cannot tell if a female is ovulating, right? Same thing with callitrichid males. So smell helps with that, as well as, and there's actually a very specific reason why ovulatory crypsis exists. It's actually evolutionary advantageous. It does keep males around to help raise the kids because the males are not exactly sure if those kids are theirs, right? Particularly in primate species in which, multiple males may be mating with a single female. So scent marking in some callitrichids will increase during pregnancy. The female will mark more often. Scents from the pregnant females may promote group cohesion so that helpers are present when the infants are born, right? So it's almost like she's scent marking and giving the other callitrichids in the group kind of an indication of how close she is to birth, right? And what ends up happening is that makes sure that all of the members of the family and all the members of the group, social group they're living in, are around when the baby is born to offer a hand, right? This is kind of a part of what we talked about earlier, that concept of alloparenting. So in common marmosets, dominant females will mark more frequently, and when they do, they will press their gland down firmly and hold it there longer than other females. The dominant females are much more likely to be ovulating than the subdominant. And this smell scent marking in marmosets is so powerful that when that dominant female begins ovulating and starts scent marking, it will actually stop. The smell will stop the ovulation of all the other females in the group. So if we have territory and scent marking, copious scent marking of an environment may inhibit the approach of what we call conspecifics or other members of the same species. Galagos and podos monkeys will urine mark 4 times more frequently near the periphery of their ranges or their habitats than in the center, right? So the marking may serve as a territorial deterrent. So I was just showing you some of those smaller primates. We do see a lot of scent marking of smaller primates because, in essence, it is a deterrent away from kind of other primates coming into their area. There's also scent marking on food sources. Marmosets will frequently scent mark the gouge holes of their feeding holes on the trees on places where they have just gnawed. And what they are doing is they're kind of marking it because they know that that place has already been drained of the sap in the tree gum. So what they're doing is they're putting that scent there so the next time they come back to the tree, they know that they shouldn't try to eat from the same hole until they can no longer kind of smell their own urine, for lack of a better term. We also have scent marking and dominance. Dominant males and sometimes females in many mammalian species secrete more pheromones, have larger scent glands, and mark more frequently than the subordinate animals. This is definitely seen in callitrichids as well as lemurs. So we look at scent and evolution in terms of general patterns. In general, olfactory communication may have originated in mammalian species as a long-standing form of communication for relatively nocturnal solitary animals. It is phylogenetically a very old and primitive trait in the primate order, but can be a very sophisticated system of information transfer. So let's move on to verbal communication in primates, or otherwise known as call systems. They're used for species recognition. Each species has a unique repertoire. New species of bush babies and tarsiers can actually be discovered on the basis of their vocalizations because they are so unique from each other. Primatologists have actually gone out into the field, set up tape recorders, and then later listened to the tapes and were able to identify the presence of new species. And there is a dramatic difference between chimps versus bonobos, right? Chimps kind of give you that more classic ooh, 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 ah, ah, ah kind of noise, whereas bonobos make kind of a very high-pitched chirping sound that's more similar to what we hear a squirrel or a bird making. Call systems are also used to distinguish within and between group distinctions. So you want to know different members of your own group as well as be able to distinguish between different groups of the same species. So it's in animals that are territorial, they use long distance vocalizations to communicate their whereabouts, and this allows members of different groups to avoid or approach each other safely. One of the ones I like to use as an example is the loudest of the primates, which is the howler monkey. Here you can see a red howler, and you can see he's got a big kind of bulge right below his mouth. That's a big throat sac that he inflates that allows him to kind of do these very loud, long-distance calls that sound a lot like kind of a Gregorian monk's chant. So call systems are also used in feeding, right? When a pygmy marmosets are spread out over a big tree eating gum, they will do a special trill in sequence, that waiting for all members to indicate their presence before any one member trills a second time. So call systems can also be used for security. So this is what these little pygmy marmosets are doing. They kind of make a little chirp in sequence, and they know that if one member of the group doesn't chirp, something might be wrong. So a predator might be around, that they may have gotten that little critter, or they may have fallen off the tree. There could be a whole host of reasons, but they know that something is up, that they don't hear a member do that special chirp. Call systems are also used in parenting. Mothers know the sounds of their own babies in many monkey species and primate species, which is really interesting because I'm not sure if that same tenet holds with humans as well. If they've done playback experiments with rhesus macaques as well as vervet monkeys, and they play the screams of particular infants, and the mothers respond more strongly to the screams of their own offspring. Even unrelated females will look at the juvenile's mother even before responding themselves. So they even recognize the screams of other mothers within their own group. They recognize the cries of their children as well. So you have intentional or involuntary information sharing as well that happens with primate species. Non-human primates only have some voluntary control over their vocalizations. Chimp males will try to be very quiet when they are on patrol of their territorial borders, and they want to be able to notice the other group before they themselves are noticed, because once they notice, they start to kind of hoot and holler. It's part of their kind of involuntary reaction that they have when they see an opposing group. So they want to be able to see the other group first so that they're not caught off guard because of that involuntary control over their excitement and vocalization upon finding a rival group. So in terms of chimps and sound, we have two distinct chimp groups that are under heavy study. We have the Gombe and the Thai chimps, and both the Gombe and Thai chimps will hunt for meat. The Thai chimps are much more cooperative in their hunting than the Gombe chimps, and chimp groups are located by primatologists because the males will actually drum on the bottoms, or what we call the buttresses of trees, which is a very, very loud sound, and the dominant males will drum during the day to let the other group members know which direction the group is traveling as a whole, because most primate groups don't kind of pick an area and just hang out all day. Most of them are kind of on the move and kind of, whether they move slowly or whether they move quickly, most of them have kind of a range that they move throughout the day. And they can also be used to locate them by the nut cracking sounds that we hear in the forest, right? Because we know that's the potential for chimpanzees to be using rocks to crack open nuts. So in cooperative hunting, the Thai chimps will actually sharpen spears, and some Thai chimps will actually use those spears to dig into crevices and trees to try and see if there's any bush babies. Chimps absolutely love eating bush babies as well as colobus monkeys. So the Gombe chimps, in terms of hunting, the most experienced hunter amongst the Gombe chimp group is a chimp named Falstaff, and he is also very tolerant to humans. And there are 5 other males within the group that follow him, and they walk and then they stop and they listen, right? They're following Falstaff, and when they hear the noises of monkeys jumping from branch to branch, they know that they're getting close to their goal, which is finding those colobus monkeys. So the red colobus monkeys themselves have a very distinctive cough-like vocalization, so they are very worth hunting to these chimpanzees. So that's the sound that they're looking to hear, or that Falstaff is looking for when they're hunting out in the woods. So they find a group that inhabits several trees, and they quietly climb up them, hoping to remain undetected for as long as possible, and the other chimps will position themselves to block possible escape routes. So in terms of the Gombe chimps, when they hunt, Falstaff essentially will be kind of the point man. He'll crawl up the tree that has the monkeys in them, and the other chimps will start to kind of fan out and crawl up the trees to block possible escape routes. So when they're detected, the monkeys will try to flee, and the chimps will give off special hunting barks, and hopefully one of the chimps will catch the monkey, excuse me. So chimps will often attempt to try and grab a juvenile, and adult male colobus monkeys are very brave and will even try to fight off a chimpanzee, right? And colobus monkeys, I mean, the difference in size is very, very dramatic. I mean, a colobus monkey is a fraction of the size of a chimpanzee, but they will try to fight them. This is something, and even those males will actually sacrifice themselves so that females and juveniles can get away. This is something in primate species that we call altruism, which at one point in our kind of studies, we once thought that primates and animals in general were incapable of altruism. So successful hunts usually involve a minimum of 3 motivated hunters acting cooperatively. When 3 or 4 chimps act as a team, more than half of the hunts result in a kill. Actually, around 70% of them do. Goodall says that the Gombe chimps don't cooperate as often as the Thai chimps do. So if we look at some of the hunting differences between the two groups, even when they do hunt in groups, their strategies are different. The Thai chimps will arrive under a group of monkeys, and then the hunters scatter silently, gradually closing in and encircling their quarry, right? So in essence, what they're doing is they're spreading around the colobus monkeys, and they're gradually kind of closing in and sync. The Gombe chimps, on the other hand, are what we just kind of talked about. They typically travel together and climb up different trees. When the monkeys scatter, they each take off and chase a different monkey, or they are trying to block off the possible escape routes. So let's switch gears here and discuss or review kind of the basics of primate diets, which you will have some of your lab activities will address this as well. In terms of primate diets, of course, you have frugivores, which are fruit eaters, right? We've talked about all this before. Folivores, which are leaf eaters, insectivores, which are insect eaters, omnivores, which vary, gummivores like marmosets, and faunivores like tarsiers. And faunivores, essentially, they'll eat anything that's smaller than they are. And this relates to something that we refer to as optimal foraging strategy. And it's a concept that works with many different kinds of animals. And in essence, what they will do is they will get the food that has the most calories while expending the least amount of energy. So in essence, it's find, capture, and consume. And this involves many important concepts in ecology like adaptation to the environment, competition within the environment, and how energy flows within an ecosystem, right? And all optimal foraging strategy is saying is that a primate group or even a basic animal group will try to, in essence, expend the least amount of energy trying to get food. So in terms of primates, strict categories are somewhat misleading. Most primates will eat some fruit, which is high in energy, easy to digest, carbohydrates, or in an oily, fat-rich form. Many primates get essential fats and starches from seeds. Flowers and nectars are also a good source of carbohydrates that many primates will utilize, right? What varies most is where they get their protein. So the smaller body primates will often eat insects and fruit to try and acquire protein, whereas the larger body primates will often eat fruit and leaves, right? So the difference really here is that where's that protein coming from? Is it coming from insects or is it coming from leaves? And this relates back to the Red Queen rule, which says that it takes all the running you can do to stay in the same place, right? And this is a very important concept in evolutionary biology and how a species interacts with the environment, right? In essence, what it's saying is that the environment is constantly changing. So the selective pressures that are facing any given species constantly changes as well. So creatures must constantly adapt, proliferate, and evolve, not just for reproductive advantage, but also for very base survival. So let's look at primate communities. We have, in essence, a difference between the ecology versus the social system, and all of these factors play a role in what the social system ends up being in a primate community. And we'll look at the different categories of social systems. In terms of consciousness and cognition, chimps are among the smartest of the primates, apart from humans. They are fully capable of using tools, and these stones average generally around 320 millimeters in length and about 4 to 5 pounds in weight. And the chimps will actually specifically select those stones, and they all will weigh around the same and be kind of around the same size. In terms of cognition, most primates are capable of learning and imitation, but there is little evidence of active teaching among primates. So it's that whole concept of monkey see, monkey do, right? They're able to watch someone do something and they are able to copy it, but one chimpanzee is not capable of teaching another chimpanzee a certain technique for something, right? So apes, in essence, understand the object-task relationship where they realize that it is necessary to bring the tool to a certain place where it will be used for getting food. But apart from that, that's where it kind of ends. Apes are not capable of kind of making tools more efficient or modifying tools to make them better. If we look at a comparison of all primate species, apes in general, but not most monkeys, will imitate. Imitation requires a level of representational thought that is thought to be beyond monkeys. But there are some monkey species like capuchins that are capable of imitation, right? But mostly we see imitation among apes, right? And most of this occurs amongst babies and females. And that's something that's very important to kind of remember. Most tool innovation and the use of tools occurs between females and babies because they're the ones who are kind of most actively collecting food most of the time. So you can kind of see cognition in terms of a monkey who sees itself in a mirror does not realize it is itself, right? That is how it is with most mammals, right? They don't recognize that they're looking at themselves, but an ape does. That is what the difference in representational thought is. There's also differences in ecological intelligence, and there are ecological models for the evolution of primate intelligence. So special differences in cognition are attributed to the relative strength of selective pressures for abilities such as remembering where food sources can be found or following birds to food sources, right? So you kind of develop this intelligence of, well, you know, for however complex it takes to get food or however complex the food acquisition system is, you're going to develop a kind of equal level of intelligence, right? Otherwise, your species wouldn't survive. So that relates to spatial intelligence. Primates will often forage for very long periods each day, so the ability to remember where important food sources are equals a good advantage. It can help save time and energy for other activities. Primates that rely on foods with a patchy distribution, like ripe fruit, benefit the most from having good spatial distribution, right? So primates that have high degrees of fruit in their diet tend to have better spatial intelligence than primates that do not. Spider monkeys are fruit specialists like chimps, and they have a fission fusion society much like chimps. So they'll break up into smaller groups when feeding, and they'll go straight to the trees that they remember have the best fruit. And at the end of the day, they will come back in a fusion and kind of hang out at the end of the day. Howlers, on the other hand, or howler monkeys, eat fruits but also a lot of leaves. The group will also forage together. And what's the big difference between them? The big difference is that spider monkeys are lively, intelligent, with a bigger brain per body weight than howlers. Howlers are slow, supposedly less intelligent, and have a smaller brain per body weight. So what I'm using this as a point is to illustrate that, well, howlers don't move around a lot, so they're not really stimulating that selective pressure for a better spatial intelligence, right? This is why howlers use those long distance calls to scare away other primates out of the trees that they want to eat the leaves from. Spider monkeys, on the other hand, travel around a lot. They eat a variety of different fruits, right? So remembering where that fruit is very important to them. So they have a higher degree of spatial intelligence. So I guess the moral of the story is bummer for howlers. If we look at tool use in the animal kingdom, there's actually a continuum among animals. We see kind of very rudimentary tool use occurring amongst birds and otters. We see certain bird species that will use cactus needles to kind of poke a hole in the side of a cactus to get at water or grubs. We also see otters that will use rocks to crack open clam and mollusk shells. In non-human primates, we see things like digging sticks in primates that will dig open termite mounds, or dipping wands, where they will dig into, or they'll dip them into the termite mound to kind of fish out termites, as well as we see the hammer and anvil system, where they will use rocks to crack open nuts. For chimpanzees, they're cracking open something called panda nuts. And then, of course, we have humans, right? We are the kind of the other end of the spectrum with the most complex ability to use tools. So that spectrum kind of moves from simple to complex. So this is showing you, and birds will also drop hard fruits on cats. They will use tools to make nests, as well as using spiking things to poke at their food. In primate tool use, the non-human primates even have tool composites, such as the hammer and anvil. Of course, we already just briefly mentioned this before. You have digging sticks as well as dipping wands for ant and termite fishing, and the digging stick is used to break open the mound, and then the dipping wand is more delicate for threading into the tiny tunnels of the mound. So not all chimps that live near nut trees will use hammers and anvils, so there's a difference in tool traditions, even when similar materials and foods are available, right? So not all smart animals use tools. Bonobos are rarely seen using them in the wild, and gorillas have elaborate ways of harvesting the vegetables they eat without using tools. So tool use is not kind of universal amongst kind of the higher intelligence to apes. So among all primates, it is almost always the juveniles or adult females that develop tool-related innovations first. And just to give you an example, here's an orangutan using a spear for fishing, right? And this is actually something that's pretty amazing. And they use that kind of precision and power grip that they have to grip onto the spear and go essentially spear fishing, right? This to me is one of the more amazing uses of tools I've seen amongst primates. So let's move on and talk about social intelligence, and this relates to kind of conflict and alliances, right? And we define alliances as kind of having benefits of having good memory, maybe of even greater importance than spatial memory when it comes to keeping track of social relationships. So social relationships or social intelligence is very important in keeping track of alliances. And that researcher DeWall was one of the first to realize that studying how animals fix things after a conflict is also extremely important, right? Not just who wins the conflict, but how do they resolve or how do they reconcile after that conflict? So humans and other primates, we are aggressive by nature, but we are also very good at making peace and reconciling with one another after we have had a conflict. We also have coalition building, right? And something that happens in coalition building, and if we're looking at baboons, the males will hold each other's testicles. But in most primate species, whether we are looking at chimpanzees or we're looking at baboons or we're even looking at prosimians, grooming is a way to build coalitions and to build group cohesion. And grooming follows along a dominance hierarchy, right? Basically all the other members of the group will groom the dominant male and the dominant female within the group, and then it kind of moves down the chain from there. So there's kind of a pecking order in terms of grooming, in which there's the grooming kind of follows dominance, right? Only certain members will groom other members. So let's take a quick look at primate mating systems. They are similar to humans categorically. Of course, they are related to dominance hierarchies, because many things in primate societies are related to dominance hierarchies, and can vary widely depending on the environment and the group size of the primate species. The general trend that we see in primate mating has to do with food acquisition. Females need the highest quality food they can find so they can sustain pregnancy and lactation. So females will space themselves out over the landscape to get the best access to food. Males, on the other hand, are anxious to impregnate females and pass their genes to the next generation. So males will space themselves out over the landscape to have the best access to fertile females, right? So it's almost kind of humorous. You can kind of joke or kind of be hyperbolic about it and say that, if the females didn't find the food first, then the males would essentially starve to death, because the males have very little interest in food. They're mostly looking to find fertile females. There's another trend. Females spend far more energy in the creation of and caring for offspring than males do, as a general pattern in primate species. So the rule is that those members of the sex that spend less energy in this way, the males, compete more aggressively amongst themselves for sexual access to the members of the sex that expend more energy this way, i.e. the females. This is showing you the primate distribution of the past, or the distant past, and showing you the primate distribution of the present. So you can kind of see how primate distribution has shifted. And as we kind of move into next week's conversation, as well as the week after, we'll talk a little bit about fossils, and then we'll look at early primate evolution. And we're going to find a whole lot of early primate fossils in Europe, as well as some in kind of Middle America, and some kind of further up into Central Asia. And this is because the weather, or the kind of climate, was a bit different back then, and this is where kind of primates first evolved. This is showing you modern day monkey and tarsier distribution, showing you the distribution of various monkeys in Africa, showing you the distribution of your leaf-eating monkeys in Southeast Asia, showing you the distribution of great apes. So there are some common environmental trends that we see amongst primates. They either live in an arboreal or semi-arboreal habitat. They either live in a tropical or subtropical habitat, and each cohesive group of primates has its own home range within each species. If we look at different types of mating systems, we have promiscuity, polygamy, and monogamy. Promiscuity is essentially defined as many to many. There's no real kind of rules to mating. Essentially, fertile males will mate with fertile females as long as they're not too closely related with one another. And an example of this would be one of the lesser apes, the gibbons. If we look at polygamy, this is one marriage to many. There are two forms. There's polygyny as well as polyandry. Polygyny is defined as one male to many females. This is much more common in primate species. In essence, you can look at lemurs, as well as gorillas, as well as baboons, as well as howler monkeys, as well as macaques. All of them are polygynous groups where there is one male and many females. Polyandrous groups are much more rare. That's where there's one female and many males. And an example of that would be callitrichids, due to that ovulatory crypsis we talked about earlier. And then, of course, monogamy, we have one-to-one, which is chimps, kind of. Monogamy is actually an extremely rare mating system, and we try to say that humans are monogamous, but if you take any of my cultural anthropology classes, I will tell you that the primary mating system for humans is actually some form of polygamy. It's not monogamy. So there are reproductive strategies, and they will vary between sexes, right? So for male strategies, if we look at howler monkeys, they use baculum. There's an elongated intermission theory, which says that baculum length will help them in terms of reproductive advantage, and baculum is the name of a bone that is inside of the male penis. You have a sperm plug in chimpanzees. Essentially, chimpanzees will excrete sperm on the outside of the female reproductive organ and wait for it to dry, so that in essence it plugs the vagina so that other males can't come and copulate with her. In most monkeys, those individuals that have more elongated seminal vesicles, those males, tend to be more successful in delivering sperm and being able to father more children. Baboons will regularly practice infanticide. When a new alpha male baboon comes into being, essentially, and topples the old alpha, he will go through and kill all of the babies. And the reason for this is because he knows that those babies are not his, and killing those babies will bring all of the females back to reproductive receptivity even faster. Yes, baboons are, it's a very savage life being a baboon. You also have sororal protection amongst lemurs. Sisters will actually, those kind of, lemurs are one of the few groups that are very female dominated, and males will actually try to become friendly with all of the kind of sisters of the lemurs they are trying to mate with. So if it's kind of, if you go and be friends with the sister, then you might have an in with the one you want. In humans, we have provisioning as well as friendly rapport, right? Building friendships, going on dates, things like this, kind of giving each other gifts. These are all male strategies for building rapport. So looking at some visual indicators of mating, in males you have sperm competition in some primates, like some baboon species, as well as chimpanzees, and we've already kind of talked about this. If we look at reproductive strategies for females, for chimps, you have the voracity of genital swellings. Female chimps, their genitalia will swell when they are close to receptivity and ready to mate. In rhesus macaques, you have cervical crypts, which are actually kind of places where they can hold sperm for a period of time and actually impregnate themselves after kind of copulation is over. You have oviduct length in baboons. Females that have the shortest oviduct length tend to be more successful in rearing and bringing babies to term. You even have vaginal pH variation in gorillas, right? If a female gorilla is being mated with by a male that she does not want to mate with, she can actually alter, or her body will alter the pH in her vagina, which will kill off the kind of offending rapist sperm. So this is just showing you some of that genitalia swelling in a female chimpanzee. It can get fairly exaggerated. These are showing you primate residence patterns, which are highly related to your mating patterns as well. You have a one male, multi-female. You have one female, multi-male. You have multi-male, multi-female, all male. You have a one male, one female, and then, of course, you have solitary. 1 and 3 are very, very common amongst most primate species. 2, 5, and 6 are exceptionally rare. So this is showing you sexual dimorphism in terms of body size and relative canine size. So in terms of mating systems, if we have a multi-male mating system, we're going to have a large degree of body size sexual dimorphism, and we're going to have relative large canines. If we look at a single male mating system, we're going to have huge degrees of body size difference in sexual dimorphism, and you're going to have huge degrees of relative canine size, which means they're going to have very, very large canines. If you look at pair living or monogamous pairs, kind of like humans, you're going to have very low differences in sexual dimorphism in terms of body size, and you're going to have very low or very small canine size. In terms of humans, we have ovulatory crypsis, much like those callitrichids we spoke about. Males do not know when females are ovulating, and ovulatory crypsis causes increased parental investment by males in terms of rearing young. So in humans, mating is conducted by increasing friendly rapport with members of the opposite sex, or with members of the same sex, right? Because I don't want to make it sound like I'm telling, what appropriate human sexuality is. I'm just talking simply in terms of producing offspring, right? This is kind of how we do it. But in terms of dating in general and sexuality in general, the name of the game is to build friendships and to build that friendly rapport in general.